like to welcome you to today's Medical Center Hour. I'm Marcia Day Childress from the Center for Biomedical Ethics and Humanities, and we're pleased to bring you these weekly programs. I'm also especially pleased to announce today that beginning with last week's program, the Medical Center Hour now is viewable on YouTube. We have a dedicated channel, UVA MCH, which allows us to broadcast an hour-long film of the program, and you can search for it if you just go to the YouTube homepage. Also in your handout is the web address for that. Unfortunately, our previous programs are not up there, just last week, starting with last week, but you'll be able to see it there from now on. And we thank the people in the Health Sciences Library who have made this technical leap forward possible for us. We're very grateful. Our program today is entitled Professionalism and Medical Education's Hidden Curriculum. Growing numbers of medical educators now acknowledge that a considerable amount of medical student learning takes place beyond the bounds of the formal curriculum, and that such learning is a kind of indoctrination in the unwritten rules of medicine and its practice. Increasingly, medical schools are taking steps to modulate the effects of this shadow or hidden curriculum on students' knowledge, skills, and attitudes. The current emphasis in medical education on professionalism represents in part educators' efforts to manage the inconsistencies and some of the outright conflicts that students witness between the values, ideals, and expectations articulated in professional codes and the actual behavior of individual physicians, including some of the students, teachers, and supervisors. We're delighted to welcome today educator Frederic Hafferty, a medical sociologist and professor of behavioral sciences at the University of Minnesota Medical School at Duluth. In this Medical Center Hour, Professor Hafferty will inquire into this aspect of professionalism education. There are lots of questions we can ask, and in this short hour begin to answer. What is involved in the formation of a medical student's professional self? What is a medical school's responsibility for its own hidden curriculum, as well as for the professionalism of its graduates? How does a medical school create and then assess the effectiveness of learning environments that foster a habit of professionalism, to use David Leach's phrase, and that acknowledge the moral undertaking that is the practice of medicine? We'll have time toward the end of this hour for your questions and comments as well. We're pleased to have as our co-sponsor for today's program the Academy of Distinguished Educators of the School of Medicine. And we're also holding this program in conjunction with the medical school's annual medical education research poster session. You'll see posters about physician education from faculty, residents, and medical students. These posters are lining the corridor outside of the Health Sciences Library. And this afternoon at 5 o'clock, there's a reception, and all of the poster authors will be there for you to meet and talk with them as well, and we encourage you to come there this afternoon. And now I'd like to welcome Fred Hafferty, and we'll see what he and you have to say.
Thank you, Marcia. I have to confess before I start that I did not know about the YouTube connection. So I'm launching into these remarks with a great deal of anxiety. My son, my youngest son, is on YouTube. I was thrilled to find some hockey footage of him there. But the idea now that he can go and find me is very disconcerting. So maybe I should say something like, "Hello, David." You should have 4 handouts, or at least 4 views, 2 timelines, if you will. One, a professionalism timeline, and 2, a timeline more on the hidden curriculum literature. and then also a copy, because we're going to be referring to it quite frequently, the new LCME accreditation standard, MS-31-A, which brings the concept of professionalism and the concept of a hidden curriculum together. I'll explain that more in detail in just a bit. And then there's a quote from an academic medicine article dealing with professionalism and the hidden curriculum. And I just wanted to make sure, particularly with the timelines, because I wasn't sure how well that they would show up, that you had copies of them that you could refer as I sort of used a pointer to go through some of the materials. So these are the four key topics that we're going to be covering today. Issues of professionalism, and doing a very brief review of sort of the history, if you will, of modern-day medicine's professionalism movement, which has its origins back in the mid-1980s. And then we'll do a very, very quick review of some aspects of the hidden curriculum, and then move quickly into talking a bit about learning environments, but talking about learning environments from within the context of the LCME's new accreditation standard, MS-31-A. And then finally some material that I really haven't presented before, so I'm even more anxious than usual. A take on how we might think about approaching and assessing issues of professionalism and curriculum from a learning environment perspective. Let me, and that's the network analysis part. Let me, before I start pointing out things on the timeline, and again I encourage you, if it's difficult to see, to refer to the handout, which will be a lot clearer. Why certain things are up there that are on the timeline. I'm a medical sociologist by training, and someone who came into medicine and sociology only after I went to graduate school. I had originally gone to graduate school to be a criminologist, but very early on in my training, whoops, I'm sorry, that's what I was introduced to two books by Elliot Freidson, Profession of Medicine and Professional Dominance. That's up in 1970. These were two hugely influential books that were published looking at, from a sociological perspective, medicine's status as a profession. And although Freidson was not the first sociologist to focus on issues of profession, that had been going on really since the beginning of sociology's rise as an academic discipline. His analysis of professions and his focus on medicine was groundbreaking, and it created quite a stir within sociology. And what ensued was, for sociologists, a great debate within academic sociology about the nature of medicine's status as a profession. And this great debate ranged all the way through the 1970s and into the 1980s, with various people arguing various perspectives on whether medicine was becoming deprofessionalized, whether medicine was becoming proletarianized, whether medicine was becoming corporatized. Freidson, in turn, argued that while some things were changing for physicians, medicine's status as an organizational entity was still maintaining its professional status and its socio-political dominance. And over time, Freidson had become quite enamored with professionalism as one of three principal ways of organizing work, the other two being the market which would be control, if you will, of the work by the consumer, bureaucracies, control of the work by the organization, and the third, professions, the control over work by highly specialized and skilled workers. And Frederic came to view professions and professionalism as a counter to the excesses of the market and of bureaucracy. I didn't know it then, but very little of this debate that was going on within sociology made it at all into medicine. It was as if this furor was going on over in this particular area of academia, and over here in medicine, things were relatively quiet. There was a publication in 1980, Arnold Relman, who was then the editor of New England Journal of Medicine, wrote what is a stunningly classic article on the medical industrial complex. But what's really interesting to me about that article is that if you trace out its citation counts and when it began to take off, Relman's article really fell on deaf ears in medicine for quite a while because the debate, if you will, within academic medicine about professionalism really wasn't going to take off for another 5 or 6 years. And so in some respects, Relman was a precursor to all of this. I took my first job, and then my second job, and then my third job, which landed me in Minnesota. And it was about that time that that I began to run into editorials, commentaries, articles, Arnold Relman, George Lundberg, a variety of people commenting on what was characterized as the inherent clash between commercialism and professionalism. And this was really the initiation of medicine's professionalism debate, or the debate within medicine about its professional status. And for me, it was sort of like, this sounds very familiar, but my background had been totally in sociology, and now I was beginning to transition over into medicine. And academic medicine, and organizational medicine, I should say, had reason to be concerned. Prior to the 1980s, trying to see where it is up here. Okay, right down here. Prior to the 1980s, medicine, at least as an industrial sector, really was composed of two industries. There was a small pharmaceutical, small medical equipment. And in 1982, this ended a decade-long bear market. Runaway inflation was a term that was used frequently. And we transitioned into what was going to become the nation's second longest bull market. Billions of dollars flowed into the capital marketplace. This was a period of time that was known as the dot-com era, but billions of those dollars flowed into healthcare, where investors were in search of new opportunities and people who were promising both solutions to healthcare problems and return to investors. Were beginning to come up with ideas about how to revolutionize medicine. And big money was made. I don't know how many of you follow the stock market these days. In some sense, it's probably not wise to. It's discouraging. But some of you may know of a company called HCA. Back in 1987, this was a sleepy two-hospital company in El Paso, Texas. It subsequently merged with Columbia, became Columbia HCA, and in a 10-year period of time, went public, expanded, and had become, by 1997, the nation's largest hospital company and its ninth most valuable company, meaning number of stock shares times the stock price. And this is mind-numbing growth. And HCA was not alone in its rags to riches story. So organized medicine was right. The increasing corporate presence in medicine was transforming what had been to that point largely a cottage industry. And what emerged out of those concerns, again, driven by a lot of articles in the medical literature, was this new modern-day professionalism movement that's now 25 years old and still evolving. And the movement's gone through a couple of different waves or iterations. The first wave had to do with definitions and meanings. So there was a lot of articles about how professionalism was vaguely defined, and we needed to somehow come up with better ways of defining things so we could talk about them better. And articles like the Cruise and Cruise, there's another article up there by Herb Swick, focused on issues of definition. A second wave quickly followed, something too quickly, focusing on measurement. Folks said, fine, we know better now what we're talking about, now we need to be able to measure and assess it. And the Stern book that's up there is an example of a good piece of literature on measurement. Organizations and work by organizations both preceded and quickly followed this. The ABIM Foundation has played a major role in organized medicine's professionalism movement. They were the ones back in 1989 that switched over from what had been their Project Humanism to Project Professionalism. In 2002, the ABIM Foundation, with partners, helped to formulate the position charter. And just a couple of months ago, the ABIM Foundation had a conference, a multi-stakeholder conference on 21st century professionalism. To me, very interesting. Its focus was on how different types of payment systems might promote or hinder professionalism, how different types of organizational structures might promote or hinder professionalism, how different types of policies might promote or hinder professionalism. The medical journals played a very important part in this whole movement. A key journal in all of this was the Academic Medicine, which is the journal of the AAMC, and a main driver in that was under its then editor, Adine Kelly, and there was a ton of literature that came out under her editorship on issues of professionalism. The next wave was codification. That was led by the ACGME when it established its 6 core competencies, one of which was professionalism. Undergraduate medical education followed. In 2008, you had the LCME in July of 2008 coming out with its new accreditation standard, MS31-AM. We'll come back to that, but I'm going to skip over here. That is the accreditation standard. You can see from the text that this is where the LCME sought to merge issues of professionalism with issues of the hidden curriculum, but I'll nail that down a little bit more in just a second. If you want to read more about the waves, and I apologize for being self-serving, but there are two publications that will sort of detail that history for you. The first in Perspectives in Biology and Medicine, and the second is a chapter in a book that will be out this spring. Okay, that brings us up to date on professionalism and the professionalism movement. And what I want to then switch over to before coming back is the second timeline, which is less a timeline and more just a way of organizing some information on the hidden curriculum. The concept itself comes out of education and education theory, but it first appeared in the literature in 1993. There's a very interesting story, at least it's an interesting story to me, about that first article and how it actually came to be an article with a great deal of credit going to the dean. But if we have time, maybe I'll tell you a little story about it during the question period. But since that first publication, there have been literally a couple of hundred articles that have, in one way or another, attempted to pull that concept and tie it to issues of both medical education in general, but then also professionalism specifically. There have been a variety of conferences, the ABIM in 2005, and there's a reference up there for that, have attempted to figure out ways of making a transition from an education system that focuses largely, that had focused in the past largely on teaching, to one that would begin to hold itself accountable for things student learning. Now, I'm not going to spend any time this morning defining the hidden curriculum for you, except just to draw the distinction between your formal curriculum, that what you say you do, your curriculum on paper, if you will, what you intend to do, and that, as Marcia said, this just is a small part of the overall learning that goes on for students. It's an important part, but it's still it's only part of what students learn. There's a variety of idiosyncratic and happenstance learning that goes on in interactions between and among students, between and among faculty and students. And there's also the learning that goes on as students read, if you will, the organization, the organizational culture, and what the organization values in terms of how curriculum is organized, in terms of how buildings are designed and laid out. Students are very smart. They pick up a lot of things. And they read the space, if you will, between the formal and the informal. Bad example maybe would be difference between the formal speed limit in Minnesota at 70. But that's not the real speed limit. I mean, the real speed limit is somewhere between 75 and 80. And everybody operates on that informal, not the formal. And most organizations run on their informal rules, with the formal rules only coming to play when the informal get bended too much. So what might be an example of some of these informal messages? All right, I know a school that says we have an integrated curriculum, and it's true. The courses have been melded, material has been synthesized, but what happens when two faculty, maybe say a basic science faculty and a clinical faculty, say different things about the same issue, the same topic. Well, one thing that often happens at this school is nothing. It's rare for a course director to say to the faculty, reconcile. Better yet, what happens when we come to an exam? And one answer on an exam question is right if it was tied to faculty A, and one answer is right if it was tied to faculty B. This is resolved by telling the students to answer the question depending upon who wrote it. So what are students learning about an integrated curriculum, or even what it means to be integrated? Back to the curriculum. Part of the literature, and this evolving literature on hidden curriculum that's outlined up there, focused on efforts by school to make teaching in the professions more formal, to shift from learning about professionalism largely through an informal curriculum, a tacit learning process, to one that was more embedded in the formal curriculum. And so you started to have, at every medical school around the country, courses on professionalism. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with this, except that because we're in the beginning of this movement, if you will, this professionalism movement, we're also in the beginning of the unanticipated consequences, if you will, at least in the short run, as students learn about, for example, formally definitions of professionalism. They're introduced to the physician charter, they're told about the ACGME competencies, and they're told about how the ACGME defines and assesses professionalism. And they begin to run into rifts or inconsistencies between what they're being formally taught and what they're seeing perhaps in the clinic or on the wards. And out of this clash between these two realities has been, and we're in it a bit now, sort of pushback by students on and sometimes a certain degree of cynicism on their part about this new professionalism. And one of the things that I wanted to point out to you in one of the handouts was this quote here, taken from a 2007, not a specialist, it was a November issue of Academic Medicine. The then editor, Mike Whitcomb, had put together a variety of articles on the formal teaching of professionalism at a dozen medical schools across the country. But he purposefully chose to preface the review of these programs with an article written by two medical students on professionalism. And this quote is taken from that article. It's not necessarily a pleasant article to read, but it is all about the tacit messages that we can send to students about what is really important in terms of their education. Now, out of all of this, and we'll go back to 31-A, the AAMC and the AMA, which are the two holders, if you will, of the LCME, or the two parents for the LCME, decided that they needed to somehow come up with a new standard that would bridge or deal with the fact that it wasn't going to be enough anymore to just focus on what was taught, number of hours, number of beds, all of the formal things that organizations do. Ron Franks and I were asked to put together a white paper for them, and I think it's on the timeline, but I think it was in 2002, got a chance to go and talk to the LCME about what then was informally called the Hidden Curriculum Standard. I happen to like learning environments a whole bunch more than calling it a hidden curriculum standard. But this is the consequence of if you will, this merging of a rather long-standing movement that's still ongoing and a conceptual framework for trying to think about things. I have a small problem with it, and the small problem being that the LCME, at least technically, ties informal types of lessons conveyed to professionalism only. And if one wants to respond to MS-31-A specifically, all one has to deal with is issues of professionalism. I would have rather they broadened it to talk about medical education at all. So how are we going to respond to, how's medical education going to respond to MS-31-A? I suspect in some respects it's going to be very much like residency education has responded to the ACGME's 6 core competencies. ACGME basically said that they were going to go into a 10-year project of reviewing over what was coming into them as residency programs were accredited, and out of that process they were going to come up with best practices. I don't consider this a negative statement, but the LCME really doesn't have any upfront ideas about what's going to constitute an acceptable response to this standard. So I suspect they're going to wait and see, and we are all going to wait and see as schools are passed on this standard or dinged on this standard. And out of all of that, over time, we're going to have some idea about how we can approach all of this. But that's kind of a defensive or reactive way to go. And so I'm trying to think of some other ways of approaching this topic. And in the next 5 to 10 minutes, I'd like to explore something that I haven't talked about in public before and see what you all think. And excuse the water, but I came down with a bad cold just before I came here. Are there ways, other ways of a wait and see? Are there ways other than a wait and see? And I think there are. First of all, I think we do fundamentally have to believe that we're in the learning business and not the teaching business. And if you're not on board there, then the ship really doesn't sail. But one possible tool that we might want to play with, and a tool that can highlight disconnects and disjunctures, is network analysis. There's a formal methodology, really hasn't been applied to medical education yet. So I want to walk you through a couple of examples, and almost in a sense walk me through a couple of examples and how we might apply network analysis to issues. First, professionalism, and then we'll broaden it out to medical education in general. First thing we want to do, and what we have here is, so we've got year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, and think of the y-axis, if you will, as going from top to bottom, beginning of the academic year and the end of the academic year. And each of these nodes represents an identified point in the formal curriculum where you say you teach professionalism. Okay, so this is all the formal curriculum. We're not going to talk about the informal curriculum at all yet. And so you do something up at the beginning of the year, and you do something, couple of things here later in the year, and there's more in year 2, and there's more in year 3, and there's a couple of things. I just made this up. But maybe that dot is orientation. Or maybe that dot is a white coat ceremony. Or maybe if there's both the white coat ceremony and in orientation, there should be 2 dots up there. But first thing you're going to do is you're going to identify where it is. Second thing you're going to do, every single node there, embedded underneath it is the what. What are you doing? What concepts, what orientation are you taking, what are the basic messages, principles, whatever that you're trying to convey. The next step then, and we start within each of the years, is to figure out where things link up. We're not going to talk yet about how they link up and whether they reinforce or don't reinforce, just whether they link up. And again, I made this up as I was going along. I said, all right, whatever went on up here is not formally tied. That's key. You don't say, nobody says along the way that this has anything to do with that. It might in the abstract, but you don't say it. Whatever these 2 things are, they're linked. You say they're tied. You convey that to the students. They have something to do with each other. Over here in year 2, same type of thing. We've got a variety of different linkages. We've got a couple of things here. There's one. It's not tied into anything. This thing over here isn't tied into that. You've got to kind of travel a bit to get from one to the other. Over here in year 3, I guess I got kind of carried away with block clerkships and just decided that, oh, okay, this stuff was tied together. This stuff is really tied together. Everything's connected one way or another. This is a little bit different. And off here in year 4, God knows what happens in year 4. I still haven't figured out what goes on in medical education in year 4. All right, so now you've made the linkages. Now you need to characterize them a little bit. Remembering that underneath each of these nodes and materials, do the formal messages that you're sending, are they reinforcing each other? We'll say here, yes, they are. But over here in year 2, whatever's going on in these 2 things, there's some disconnect. Either they're negating each other, saying one thing, doing another, whatever it might happen to be. At least initially for me, it made sense to stay within the years as you try to figure out what was going on in your formal curriculum. But at some point, you're going to want to go the next step. I took out the plus and the minuses just because it got too confusing for me to think about. You've got to start thinking about across your years, across your curriculum. After all, you're not in the business of running a first-year medical school, and then you graduate the first year, and you have a second-year medical school, etc. And so I just tried to come up with some examples. We're going to have some real-life examples in just a second of saying, well, you know, we still have some problems here. What's going on? This piece of our curriculum is just not connected to anything else. Same up here. But you know, we've got something over here that seems to be connected to a lot of stuff. What is it? What's going on in that course or clinical experience, whatever it might be, that as we look to other formal educational experiences, there are ties. And we say there are ties. Now, this is as far as I took this very explicit way of trying to connect pieces of the curriculum. The next step would be to take the informal types of learning that the MS31-A talks about. Maybe we could put up squares there and begin to do the same type of process as we try to link together all of the things that are going on within our then link it together with all of the things that are going on within student learning. Now, there are actual tools, computer-driven tools that we can use to do some of this stuff. Here's a real-life example of just a very small piece of data that came out of a class experience where a faculty member had asked students prior to coming to medical school, and this part is important, to do an exercise. And then his first class with them was on day 5. And on day 5, he asked them, whom did you talk to about this exercise? And this is nothing sophisticated. Just who did you talk to about the exercise? Now, hypothetically, we could have 54 dots up there that are not connected in any way whatsoever. Nobody talked to anybody. It wasn't part of the assignment. Nobody was told to do this in a group way. But on day 5, he asked, whom did you talk to? And and this is what we got. And what's interesting to me is, first of all, we didn't expect this amount of interconnectedness. For the longest of times, I've gone through thinking about medical education in a very incorrect way. I've thought about individuals interacting with the medical school environment. Individuals, in some sense, don't exist. We exist as part of collectivities and groups and relationships. And here's a network of relationships that exist at the very beginning of medical school. That's the first thing. Everybody's connected with everybody else. Everybody's connected with somebody else. There's nobody that's outside of any connection. Now, some of them, this person down there, number 18, he didn't talk, or she talked to anybody. Somebody talked to that person. We have another person out here. Nobody talked to that person, but they did talk to a couple of other people. But we also have individuals that were highly connected, that are hubs. Here's the most connected individual in the class. Here are the next two. Who are these people? How do they come to be so pivotal, if you will, to the information flow of the class 5 days into medical school? Now, it turns out that here there are numbers associated with the nodes, but those are real people. They have demographics, they have academic performance. One of the things that's fascinating to me is how this might change over time. How does a medical school class evolve around issues of learning? There are a variety of hypotheses that we might generate with respect to these linkages. What if success in medical school is due as much to one's raw academic horsepower, due as much to one's network of relationships as one's raw academic horsepower? I mean, we could hypothesize that when it comes to forming their academic networks, not only do gunners associate mainly with gunners, but maybe those students who perpetually hover around 70 are also more likely to associate with similar peers, but it's the ones that aren't connected that get into academic difficulty. Maybe our medical school, for example, has a mission for rural health care. Well, I mean, rurality for the longest of times has been associated with a variety of individual characteristics of somebody from a rural community, somebody who's grown up in a rural community, more likely to go back to a rural community. But maybe individuals who go to rural communities or inner city or go to certain specialties. What? Are there any pathologists here? Good. What would a pathologist, a future pathologist, look like up there? That was right off the cuff, and that's for YouTube. Do individuals going into different specialties have different relationship patterns? Don't know. We don't know a lot of this. The thing is, we can also forget, if you will, that these are individuals, people, and pretend just for a second that these are courses, and that this is a map of the curriculum at all, and that each note is a course. And again, begin to ask yourself, what is this course contributing to the overall educational environment, in contrast to these educational experiences? And again, what are they, and what are they doing, and what are they accomplishing? You can even have some fun here. I assume that most of you, in one way or another, have heard of that game. It's now on the web. You can just go and get the information, called 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon. Okay, thank you. There's another link. You can do baseball players. While I was in my room this morning, how many degrees of separation is there between Babe Ruth and Barry Bonds? And who are the players that link them together? There's actually a game that mathematicians, not a game, but there's Paul Erdos is a famous mathematician, and mathematicians have an Erdos number. Did they work with him? They have an Erdos number of 1. Did they work with somebody who worked with him? They have an Erdos number of 2, et cetera, et cetera. Same thing as Kevin Bacon. Well, we can do the same thing with concepts. We could do the 6 degrees of Hans Adolf Krebs. I mean, what are the core concepts in medical education? And what are their linkages to other core concepts? We can do that with this type of methodology and with the algorithms that underlie these types of analytical tools. And all of a sudden, you can actually, and again, it hasn't been done, and it's going to be very hard to do, but you can actually measure a curriculum. You can measure how tightly integrated a curriculum is overall. You can measure pieces of that curriculum. You can break it down into the first year, how tightly organized is your first year curriculum versus your second, your third, your fourth. You can even do it within a particular course. Your unit of analysis there might be a lecture or a teaching experience, and how well connected or not the parts of that course are. Now, are there other things to do? I'm going to skip over that. There are. I think one thing that I'm enamored with is the longitudinal clerkship movement that has also begun to morph at the residency level at UCSF and other places, where the notion of integrated and longitudinal are part of the formal teaching message. There are also some initiatives that I won't go into within, interestingly enough, physics education, where physicists, led by a Nobel Prize winner named Carl Weinman, are trying to revamp how the sciences are being taught and how to interject some more interactive and linking ways within a traditional lecture format. But just to draw things to a close, the basic message for today, regardless of the tools, is that you take the lessons of the hidden curriculum to heart and you go out and find out what your students are learning, and particularly the tacit lessons that they're picking up, the tacit knowledge, the skills, the values that they are informally picking up from peers and faculty, what they learn from the organization itself. And then you design your formal curriculum, and there always and should be a formal curriculum. That's at the heart of things. But you design it with those other kinds of learning in mind, because it's just simply not a good idea to keep on delivering what is essentially decontextualized blocks of formal instruction and pretend that that is good pedagogy. So thank you very much for your time and your consideration. And I don't know how good, I told Marcia, I don't know how good I am going to be with questions. I have a pretty severe hearing loss to begin with, and now with a cold. She said it the best. I feel like I'm about 4 feet underwater, and things are just kind of floating around me. So she may have to translate. But again, thank you for coming.
Thank you very much. We have some time for questions, and I'll ask you to speak clearly, and I'll do some translating if need be.
Dr. Hafferty, thank you. Great talk. My question follows up on Dr. Kuchai's, which is this. I think there's a long-standing principle in education and in medical education that the most powerful teacher, and therefore the most powerful learning tool, is modeling. Modeling. So I guess I'm sort of wondering, does anything work better than that? Have you ever discovered that there is something that works better? Or do people strictly and best learn from those who they learn from by how others behave?
I think, well, first of all, there's been a little shift, in this the formalizing of things. Role models, a traditional vehicle of medical education, I think it always will, always should be. I want to emphasize the should. But remember, a role model doesn't need to know that they're a role model. I decide who my role models are. You don't decide that you're a role model for me. The mentor is in a bit of the formalizing of a role model. Sorry, that came out kind of bad. Where now you have explicit responsibilities to me, I'm the student, in terms of my learning. Now, whether that formalization is good or bad, it certainly doesn't make the role model go away. The part that excuse me, captivates me, I mean, we could do the network thing. I can have tons of role models. Matter of fact, everybody in this room on some level, because you're faculty, I'll just make that generic statement, is supposed to be a role model for me. Because you've been sort of anointed by the university. And yet, we know, just like there's variation in medical practice, all doctors don't do the same things. And there's a great deal of variability in patient outcomes. And medicine is a very messy business. There's not a lot of certainty. So how do I take pieces from you? The role modeling that goes on for physicians is vastly different than the role modeling that goes on for clergy, where they're hooked up with principally one role model. Or teacher education. You're assigned to do student teaching with another teacher. And role models, I get all of you. And how do I make sense out of the variety of of ways that you approach professionalism. There are some very interesting studies, JAMA, New England Journal, Annals, British Journal of Medicine. The lead author in many of them is a guy named Campbell. One of the ones I'm thinking about right now went out and asked, do you agree with core professionalism principles? And there's great agreement across the profession as to what folks believe in. But then went and said, what do you do? I'm being too simplistic here, but just what do you say, what do you do? And there's great inconsistency in people admitting that they don't. A bunch of scenarios were developed for them to answer how would you behave under these circumstances. And I know it's not real behavior, it's what they say. But this was I think this was a JAMA article that deals with this underlying tension between how one believes and how one acts, and that they're not necessarily the same. And so, as a role modelee, I'm not sure how students sort all of that out. And yet, I can't imagine this is an apprenticeship tradition that goes back, hundreds of years. And I have a love affair with medicine, and I can't imagine that there should be anything other than wonderful role models for students to learn from. Although residency work hours and duty hours and stuff is having some effect here too. But that's a whole other topic.
Well, our hour is up, I'm sorry to say.
Thank you for your patience.
We will continue this conversation after the end of the formal program, if you like. I'd invite you to come back next week when we have the Richardson Lecture of the School of Medicine that deals with medical error and patient safety. The title of the program is Disclosing Medical Errors to Patients, Recent Developments and Future Directions. And we'll be hearing from Tom Gallagher from the University of Washington and Mary Hardy, who's a nurse clinician here in the Medical Intensive Care Unit. So I'd ask you to join us then. And please join me now in thanking Fred Hafferty.
Thank you all.